Okay.
Hey. Hi, Sarah. It's so nice.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. When I was listening to Jesse's story, I was like, oh, I have to do this too because, I think, well, hopefully, like there's somebody out there similar to me that would want to hear the same, like the things, or I could say the things that I would have wanted to hear. Although you say them too, it's just, I think we were talking about earlier, it's sometimes nice to hear it from others as well, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
because sometimes somebody says it in a different way, or as we
Mhm.
were just talking about before we hit record, sometimes you're in a place that when somebody says it, like I might have said it, but you might say something in your own words now. And that's exactly when someone was like meant to
Yeah.
hear, you
Yeah,
know?
half the time, even when I just talk about it, I have insights. Like it's almost like I just need to talk it through with myself. So I was telling you it was really cathartic to go through this. I was sort of going through my life and my history with anxiety, and it was interesting. It even helped me learn a little bit more about myself. Right when I look at it, you're so, with anxiety. Sometimes you're so deep in the moment of panic or fear that you forget just how far you've come. And so it was good to kind of look back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to share your story?
Yeah. And so I mentioned to you, I think telling the whole story is where it becomes really helpful. So I won't harp on the past. I think, like many of the people you probably talk to or are listening, I've always been an anxious person. I just didn't realize it. So, in high school, I was really concerned about always staying on top of things, right? I never wanted to miss school because I thought if I fell behind, I would lose control. I had to sleep every night for 8 hours, or else if I was too tired the next day, I wouldn't be able to be productive. Like you start to see looking back that these things that I didn't realize were anxiety were actually anxious thoughts. Um, but I don't think it really came to a head until I was put in a really uncomfortable situation, which is moving away and going to college. And I remember very vividly my first panic attack. I was sitting in a lecture hall, and all of a sudden I just felt like zoomed out, right? Like I was like everything became a little bit scary. You used the word spooky. I think that's the perfect word. Like I suddenly just felt very unsafe. I couldn't focus. I had, heart palpitations. I just immediately with the whole like um freeze flight or what is it called?
Oh,
Flight.
or is it?
Why am I
Is that
why
the?
am I am like blanking on the anyway, so when it came down to it, I just left. Immediately left. I drove 2 hours home. And when I got to like my safe space, which was at my parents' house, I was like, okay, I'm okay. And then I was like, oh wow, school's really scary. I get really anxious when I'm at school. And I didn't really give it much more thought because when I went to my safe space, I was totally fine. And so that's how my first year of college went. I would go to class, I would just white knuckle it through. I'd be basically panicking the entire time, but I got through it. Um, and then I would come home every weekend because that was my safe space. And inevitably, I actually left college and I went home. And I just, I spent a lot of time just kind of avoiding that feeling of a panic. And so I would do things to avoid it. But I'm also a very adventurous person. I also lean into fear, right? Like because I was afraid of it, I almost wanted to do it more. Like I never wanted to be held back by my anxiety. And so my junior year of college, I decided I'm going to study abroad. I want to go to Paris. And that was like a dream of mine. And I was so excited and I worked so hard and I saved up all this money and I got into the program and I went there and I was so excited that I wasn't really that nervous until the first night came and I couldn't sleep. Sleep becomes a problem. You know this, Lily, but sleep is apparently a problem my whole life. Um, and I just panicked. I thought if I don't sleep, I'm going to have that feeling I had in college. I'm away from home. I can't just go home. I can't go to my safe space. I'm stuck. Just this overall feeling of not feeling safe. And I went home. I went home like a few days later, and it felt like a total just disappointment. Like my anxiety was ruling my life. This is what it was always going to be like. It was always going to hold me back from doing the things that I wanted. It was very, very difficult. Now, again, when I went back to my safe space and kind of calmed down, I was okay. But you kind of see this theme of like I'm running away from almost like myself. Like I'm running away from the situation. I was like, you have to go to somewhere safe. You have to go somewhere where somebody can take care of you. Um, and so it was really difficult. And I spent the next maybe 5 or 6 years just again, trying to take baby steps. I think one thing I learned is like that was a really big leap of going from really the comfort of being at home to like a completely uncomfortable situation. So maybe I needed baby steps. And so I still kept pushing myself to just try new things. I moved cities rather than moving to another country. I moved cities. So, I was moving kind of up and down the West Coast and yeah, really avoiding heightened feelings of panic. But I was always felt like one step away from a panic attack, right? Especially when I was in a new situation. So I would travel for work and I would think, okay, well, who's close to me that can take care of me if something happens? If I have a panic attack, what's my exit route? How do I get back home? I mean, I was constantly thinking of my exit strategy. And that was really hard, to enjoy things, even though I was so focused on my career and so focused on it, on meeting new people and doing fun things. I was just always feeling like anxiety was like right there, just about to, pull me pull me down. I think I told you it felt like I was walking on a tightrope over this big black hole. And I was just like one bad feeling or thought away from falling into that hole and having to climb back up. It was terrifying. Um, but I did okay until about 2017 when I had what I would call the big one, like the biggest panic attack I had ever had. At the time, I didn't really understand the physical role that happens when you have a panic attack. So I had I was really heightened sense of vision and hearing. I had, I basically made myself believe I had tinnitus. I made myself believe that I had really bad eye floaters that were never going to go away, that were always going to block my vision. I definitely, for the first time, felt I was going crazy. Right. And I don't mean to use that word inappropriately or loosely. It just, that's how I felt. Like I thought I was losing my mind. I had a very stressful job. I had some medical issues at the time, and I just hit a breaking point and I actually had to quit my job. Um, and I remember telling everybody around me that I was so scared people were gonna leave me. My boyfriend, who was my husband at the time, or but now, he was gonna leave me. My mom wasn't gonna wanna take care of me. My friends were gonna hate me. Like, I had built up this catastrophe, which was nobody would love me, I would go crazy, I would lose everything I had, and that was it. And I really believed it. Um, and that was hard because that was months of, I would say, just feeling very panicked every day. Now, in hindsight, I realized it did get better, like slowly, very slowly, because I was fighting against it. Very slowly, it got better. But what I was doing was I was trying to do everything possible to get rid of it. I thought, well, if I have brain fog, I must have something wrong with my brain. I got a head scan. I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I got allergies tested. I was convinced I had mold in my house. Like I was just doing a lot. Even the good stuff. I heard exercising helps. So God, I tried to prepare to run a marathon. Like I was just doing too much therapy. I was like, okay, I have to go to therapy. That will fix me. Um, and so it was a really slow process, but it did get better. But I really didn't help myself because I was so afraid of that feeling that I was just doing a lot of things. Um, and then again, things get better, which is the common theme. And really, I really leaned into talk therapy. That really did help me because I am somebody who wants to understand things on an intellectual level. So I got to learn about a dysregulated nervous system and the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and trauma response and why I was having these physiological experiences and why I was sort of leaning toward anxious thinking. We talked through a lot of my childhood trauma. I mean, it helped me understand what was happening. And I think that was needed in order to get me where I am now, because I don't think I could under, understand it deeper or on an emotional or spiritual level without really that intellectual understanding. So I was in therapy for like 6 years, which brings us to sort of present day in these last few months. And I was doing okay. I learned a lot of tactics, so I was really, like, deploying my tactics, which I now realize they weren't really helping me, right? But in panicked moments, it did sometimes help. But the number one thing that helped me was reassurance. So if I was feeling anxious, I'd call my mom or I'd call my husband. I would go find him and I'd say, "I'm feeling anxious," and I would rely on him or someone else to really help me. And it did work in some situations. Um, until I would say November time, I started having some trouble sleeping. And at that point, I think I had mentioned I had had some anxiety at night, but not a ton, not like this. This, I had one night where I woke up from these awful night terrors and I couldn't go back to sleep. And I went to my husband for reassurance and he said, well, just try to go to sleep. So then I laid there and I tried to go to sleep and I couldn't. And then I was like, okay, that's not great, but whatever. That was just one night. The next night, I couldn't sleep. And that started, I'm not going to call it insomnia. I'm going to call it sleep anxiety because that's truly what it was, right? I got sleep anxiety and I would focus on it all day. All day. I was Googling, I was scaring myself. I was convinced that this was going to be me forever. And actually what ended up happening is I created a really vicious cycle where at night I would be so anxious, I'd be so hyper aroused, I couldn't fall asleep. So then I would just continue this pattern. I mean, there were nights where I literally was not sleeping at all. And I mean at all, like I was up. I would call my mom at 2 o'clock in the morning seeking that reassurance. I would try to wake my husband, but you can't keep people awake. You can't, like, I couldn't make him stay up with me all night, right? So I was really alone. And if you remember sort of my journey to where we are now, I was always running away from a situation or running away from myself, seeking reassurance, seeking safety. But in the middle of the night, like that, I can't. There was no way to avoid this situation. There's no way to avoid myself. Um, but that was a really beautiful challenge. I actually think it was the challenge that I needed because, it made me believe like, okay, it's just you. So what do we do now? Right. Like you can't escape the situation. And so I did what I do best, which is I did everything possible. I found the sleep coach school, which really did help me. I started deploying I called a psychiatrist because I was like, I need medication. I assume I called my therapist. I got more appointments. Like I just started doing a lot about it, which just flustered me because none of it was really helping. And then I don't know, I had thought about this great woman I had seen on TikTok. Because I had found your TikToks maybe a year ago. And I remember vividly it was the one where you said, it just right out, it was probably one of the stories that you shared, but you said, I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. And I was like, nobody has ever shared their anxiety story that way. I thought I was the only one who felt like they were going crazy and was afraid of that. And so I loved watching your videos, but I remember in the middle of the night thinking of you. And I actually got on your TikTok account. I started binge watching all your videos, which probably wasn't healthy, but I did. I just watched it. And it gave me really this feeling of hope. I'm like, look at this woman. And it wasn't until I found one that you did on sleep. And I was like, oh, maybe she can help me with sleep. So I immediately joined your community. um, and I just again started binge watching all of your videos. And I am not suggesting people do that. And we'll get back to how I got a healthier relationship with your videos. But I learned about the three pins principles from you. I was on a walk out in the woods listening to you talk about them, and I definitely didn't get it. I listened to Sid Banks, definitely didn't get it on like an emotional level, but I understood it intellectually. And I don't know, like something clicked, and I said, well, what happens if I just don't do anything? Like Lily's sort of just telling me, like, just it's a thought. Thoughts are neutral. Let them flow. You only give them the power when you give them that sort of emotional response when you do something about them. Like, what do I do? What happens if I try to let that go? Well, I couldn't. I was too hyped up. But the night before a big trip for Christmas, where I was so afraid I wasn't going to sleep, I had a call with you. We had our first one-on-one. I decided I need more than just the community. I wanted the Peace from Within program. I wanted a bit more one-on-one time with you because I really could tell that this felt different, your teachings, but I just needed more. And I'm actually staring at the notes that I rapidly wrote down. But the one that really stuck with me was when we are feeling really off, our thoughts are really off, right? When we are feeling bad, our thoughts are really distorted. Do not believe them. And and then I told you about all these things I was doing and how I was trying to fix it. And I was watching all these videos on people with insomnia. And you were like, I'd be really interested to hear, how this would, what would happen if you just focused on your journey. That's their journey. What happens if you just focus on your journey? Like if you just stay away from those things that might not be helping you and you just see what happens with you. And I was like, okay, I mean, yeah, sure, I've tried everything else, right? Like, let's try it. And I went on my trip and I didn't sleep great, but I did sleep. And I didn't worry about it as much. I distracted myself. I stopped focusing on it. I did not let myself Google. I did not let myself even really talk to people about it. I told my husband, I don't want to talk about sleep. I don't want to talk about anxiety. Just leave me alone. Let's just focus on our kids and having fun. Um, and I wasn't comfortable. It was not like I wasn't totally carefree. I didn't do anything. And I noticed that the less I did, the more I slept, and I'm not talking I'm sleeping 9 hours. I mean, I was getting like a couple of hours, but that felt better than nothing. And I slowly started to realize that if I let go, everything sort of just like fell into place. And from there, I had just ups and downs. Every day was, I didn't, it was a crapshoot. I didn't know if it'd be a good day or a bad day, if I'd panic or not, but it's better than being in a panic state the whole time. Um, and I remember I thought, well, this isn't working. This is so uncomfortable. Like I'm getting slightly better, but it's not quite there. And my husband was like, Sarah, just go on medication. I don't know what you're doing. Like help yourself. Like this is you're torturing yourself. Just help yourself. And I'm going to say this first because I think the conversation around medication is such a an important one. It saves lives. I have thought about getting on it multiple times, but I firmly believe, and I think you said this too, that your relationship with medication is like half of being successful, right? And I was so afraid of taking medication. I didn't know that I didn't really think it was going to help me because I was so worried about it. But when he sat there and said, "Why don't you take it?" At the time, I did not realize that this was some huge insight. At the time, I just said it. I just said, I don't know. I just trust myself. I trust myself to figure this out. And I just want to see if I can do it. And I get emotional because it wasn't until maybe a few weeks ago when I look back on that conversation, I thought, holy shit, you've never said that before. You've never once in your life trusted yourself. In fact, you've always been afraid of yourself. You would tell people, you don't know what it's like in my mind. You don't know what it's like to battle internally. I'm a scary place. Like you, for the first time, you thought like you can do that. You have everything that you need. And I would say that's the biggest insight. And that was the turning point. And I stopped binge watching all your videos. I actually went back and I started to rewatch them with a bit more of a clear mind, a bit more intention focused, right? I'd watch one a day and really think through it. I slowed down. I stopped I stopped, trying to do so much, including with your program, right? Like I told you, I binge watch. I would show up to every single coaching call. Like I just did what felt good. And I really leaned into the idea that like I have the wisdom within me to get me through this. And I'm by no means, I shared this with you. I'm by no means like cured. I actually still last night sat in bed for a couple of hours thinking, oh God, I can't fall asleep. But through your learnings, I didn't panic. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't try to change my thought. I just sort of sat with it and was like, it's okay that this is uncomfortable. This is what it is. Everything, just like nature, everything is going to change. I mean, I stole that from Dick and Bettinger, but I mean, there's been so many insights, so many takeaways. Um, but I also think it was a whole journey to get here, right? Like I intellectually understood it through talk therapy. I white knuckled my way through it. I leaned on people for reassurance. I battled myself for over a decade. And finally, I realized that I'm not a scary place and that I have everything within me to take care of myself and that I will. And that trust in myself has been the difference, right? It really feels like the turning point because I had felt like talk therapy was getting me only so far. I think I actually even talked with my therapist and said, it can't be like this forever, right? Like I can't just I'm like this is exhausting. I'm just sort of battling this anxious feeling. Um and this feels like the missing piece, right? This emotional, more spiritual understanding and also just this understanding that genuinely my thoughts are neutral. Sometimes they're scary and I don't need to believe them. Sometimes they're beautiful and I should believe them and when they're happy and when they make me feel good. And it seems so simple, but it really your program was really like the turning point, but I am still working through it. I just I don't do as much. And honestly, that feels really peaceful because I'm exhausted. I'm sure somebody listening right now is exhausted. It is exhausting. And I can tell you that when you sort of just step back and really believe that inevitably things will change because they will. I mean, even looking back, I told you about that year after I quit my job. I mean, it got better. It did. And I fought it tooth and nail and it still got better, right? I did everything to get in my own way. It still got better. So what would happen if I didn't get my own way? Well, it gets better just a little bit faster, right? So I told you, this sleep thing, I think if it had happened 6 years ago, it would have spiraled me into another year of just pure panic and anxiety. It was only actually a couple months. I mean, it started in November. I'm feeling a little bit better. It's January. I had a little bit of a panic attack last week. I told you at night. It only lasted a couple of days. Like these are wins for me. These things are getting more and more short lived, and I'm nowhere in this totally calm and peaceful mind 24/7. But I'm definitely doing better. Um, and yeah, I just wanted to share sort of my whole story because I hope somebody out there finds it, somewhat, resonating with them.
Thank you so much. I had like full body chills, like when you talk, like, literally in my scalp. Um, from when you were talking about, I was so in the moment that I didn't write it down. I was just so in the feeling, but of trusting yourself. And then you did such a beautiful job of sharing your story too, of not knowing that you were your own safe space.
Hmm.
And there was a couple things that jumped out at me because even early on, you said something like the theme was that I always return to balance. I don't know if that was your words, but the theme was it always got better, and the fact that you could see that because sometimes people don't and they always think, well, I always get anxious or I always struggle when you actually were pointing out your own resiliency, and
Yeah.
and also in the resiliency of the human spirit, that even though you might have innocently overcomplicated, it got better. It always got better, and I think
Yeah.
that's such an important thing because sometimes people don't realize that, until one thing that I've done in past groups is we share stories of wisdom. And it's until when people, I'll ask them and they'll kind of reflect like you did, and they'll come and they'll say, wow, I didn't look at it like this. I had a woman who was doing a semester abroad in Italy or somewhere, and she was experiencing derealization and depersonalization, that feeling of unreality. And then I think she made it through her program, but then she joined my group. And it wasn't until we were talking about wisdom and how it got us through it. She's like, "I still went to class." She's like, "I
Yeah.
finished," 'cause she started feeling it towards the end of it the time, and so she was just like, "I gotta get through it." She's like, "I was in a foreign country." But it wasn't until that moment that she saw how resilient she was. Like, "I made it through." Somehow, I don't know how I passed my class.
Yeah, I glossed over this and not to like applaud myself, but also while all of this was happening, I got my master's degree. I moved cities. I had amazing jobs. I've got amazing career growth and development. I'm in a great position. I have a beautiful family. I had two kids during COVID. Like I sit, sometimes you sit here and people talk about their anxiety or like, I am anxious. And you almost, it's like it becomes your personality. And I am so much more than my anxiety. And I loved that when I met you, there was this phrase that I still say it's until now, I was an anxious person. Until now, I would respond this way. I don't do that anymore. And I'm really trying to lean away from it's just describing myself as anxiety or anxious because it's not who I am. And I have so much else going on. But I do think that's one thing I forget to look at is just how much my wisdom got me through. And my wisdom got me through some dark days,
Yes.
dark, dark, so I don't want anybody listening here thinking, well, she doesn't understand my anxiety, right? Like, because that was a feeling I had was nobody has it like I do. Um, and I really I sympathize with that so much because I know that feeling. Um, but I think we all do, right? And that's why I really lean into you, Lily, was because I felt like for the first time somebody was saying something that like I had felt, right? Um, but you can get through this, right? And you are. I mean, anybody even listening to this, I'm like, your wisdom brought you here. You're already like leaning into something that hopefully feels good and gives you hope. And so I just think sometimes those things get drowned out by just the fear and the scariness of, all the other things happening during your life. But yeah, I have a beautiful life. I've been great. I've been really successful. Even if I'm not sleeping, even if I'm panicking, even if I'm anxious, like it's just, you know, it's it's interesting. And that's why I said doing this exercise of looking how far back we've come has been so helpful to me, because it actually makes me really appreciate myself and, appreciate that all the steps I took got me here.
Yeah. And I hadn't heard the beginning part of your journey with
Mhm.
college, and with high school. And to me, it's like that also you were I don't know if the right word was grateful, but even that like how it's playing out, that it showed up alone at bed, you know,
Yeah.
this opportunity to although I because sometimes people are like, "Oh, do you regret da 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 da?" Sure, if I could go back, maybe I would erase some of the but like honestly, I wouldn't. I mean, my story got me here and that's the way it played out. And for you to have this opportunity for you to realize you are your own safe space and to trust in yourself and that it looked like because we have our own reassurance
Yeah.
and what we're when you're like I'm not a scary place,
Mhm.
we forget that because we return to our safe space but we're still bringing ourselves there, like our safe space is actually in our mind, it's in our quiet mind. And yeah, when our I love that you said it, how it can feel like our anxiety is the worst because I know and I had somebody. Oh, the, mother who wrote a letter about the harm OCD, and she
Yep.
was really helpful because she said, we did a conversation and then she wrote a letter and she wanted to say, like, I know that you might be thinking, oh, but my thoughts are way worse or my experience, because that's so common. Somebody might see you and be like, well, look at Sarah,
Yeah.
and and I want to, not invalidate people's experience, but it's so common to think, I have it worse. I'm actually really mentally unstable. I am a scary place because it can feel really, really scary. And I love that it stuck out with you that when we feel really off, our thinking is really off. That's so,
That has been my, like, I don't it's not a tactic. It's a trust. It's like it's a thing that I sometimes just say to myself, like, "Ooh, that you're feeling pretty bad. Don't trust that thought. Let's not trust that thought." Um, but on the opposite end, it's given me, I think on the better end of it is that when I feel good, I actually really do trust my thoughts. Like before, if I felt really happy, I'm like, "Oh, anxiety's on the horizon." I mean, I was feeling so happy with my kids, and I was like, panic attack's going to happen because you're too happy. And I've stopped doing that. I've just believed, like, oh, you're really happy right now. This is exactly where you should be and how you should feel. And this feels so good. And this is who you are. And like, so I started to take that and not just use it for when I feel bad, but also to use it when I feel good. Because personally, I feel a place of gratitude has also helped me combat some of the more negative thinkings. And I'm not saying you have to always be happy and, have gratitude, because I hate that. Um, I'm just saying that when I have those moments, I don't let them flow, because it's so funny. You let the happy thoughts just flow by and the negative ones you're like, stick around. So I try to have those happier, more filled thoughts stick around too, because I feel like it's only fair, you know?
I love that. Somebody, I don't know which mentor of mine or wherever it was like, bank it,
Mhm.
Also, bank
Mhm.
times, there's so many great things to bank, and that's why I even think having this conversation, reflecting, like sometimes banking, I felt anxious and then it flowed. Like I felt, or whatever it is. Um, because yeah, I think sometimes well, I don't know. There's like a meme where it's like me remembering happy thoughts, and it's like someone's writing
Yes.
sand in it, and then it's like me like remembering bad thoughts, and they're like or bad experience, bad or anxious. They're like chiseling it into stone. But it's like
Yeah.
we get to decide which ones we pay attention to, which ones we remember, which ones we validate, and knowing that. Um, and I've loved getting to know you, and I've loved hearing your story. That you're like I'm not a scary place of like the trust and the peace and just your journey. And to me, it's such a beautiful conversation to be in the three principles.
Yeah.
It's the three principles. If someone this is your first time, they're just happening whether we know about them or not. But having an understanding, and sometimes what brings us in is sleep anxiety or for me driving anxiety. But it's really helpful to me. I've seen changes far beyond anxiety of just worrying less, like being more present, kinder to myself. I just had an insight this morning. I don't know what my thoughts were, like negative thoughts. And I think I'm writing, I'm in this class. And for some reason, I'm like sick of hearing my voice, but I'm like just starting to write this book. But like, and it's like, oh, just these negative thoughts about myself for all types of things. And it was suddenly like I was getting my shoes on. I'm like, wait, these are negative thoughts. Like they're not true. But I'm like, but they felt true. And
Mhm.
so some like because it didn't have to do with anxiety, it didn't have to do with mental health. It wasn't any of that. So sometimes they get sneaky. And I was like, but I was letting them stay there because they felt true. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no. So there's always more to see. Like I'm still on my journey, but I'm grateful for seeing just the simple things of I'm gonna believe my thinking when it wishes me well. And if I don't feel good,
Yeah.
it's a tap on the shoulder, it wakes me up. Now sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with anxiety, but it was like, "Oh, this is a distracting, unhelpful thought. I'm free to" but it was like it was so strange because it was so small, but it was like, "This isn't true," whether it's about my looks or whatever it was. It was like, "Who knows if this is true?"
Yeah, I think that really, I mean, when I say that your program was the turning point, your teachings and three principles, I had to understand intellectually what was happening with anxiety, but talk therapy very innocently put me in a place that made me believe I could, like, this was just how I was built. They would talk a lot about, like, this is just, the neural pathways that you've created, and you've got to work really hard to create new ones. And it just felt like I had this thing working against me, myself. And when I met you, it was just like, what if I just thought that I'm not these thoughts. I'm not my history. I'm not my childhood trauma, which I've worked through. Like, I don't have to respond this way. What if I believed that I could respond differently? And so I just tried it. And then I realized I could. And I think slowly it's just like letting go. Like, I literally physically feel myself just like letting go of this thought that I can't control it, that I am some broken person, that I am somebody to be afraid of. And I think I told you, like, I repeated this because it was another big insight, is that when I would feel anxious, I would run to others. So what this looks like now is I don't need as much reassurance. In the middle of the night, I don't need to go get my husband. I actually just laid with myself. It was like it's the part that's missing. I feel like I could do anything, right? Because I no longer have to be afraid of myself. And I think the other thing that I wanted to note for anybody listening, and especially anybody listening that might be considering your community or working more closely with you, which I cannot say has been valuable enough. Like, it has changed everything for me working closely with you. But is that if you don't understand the three principles right away, because I'm not gonna lie, still learning, right? The feeling that you get, I'm still trying to get it. Is that you also offer other resources and other people and other teachers that have a different way of talking about it that might resonate with somebody. I've listened to every single Sarah Taylor podcast, the Dick and Bettinger sort of Q&A that you held. I learned so much from him. And one thing I want to note is something you always say, that we have and I'm going to butcher it, but like, we are really good at dealing with what is, not very good at dealing with what isn't. And one thing that I still sort of struggle with, and something we've talked about in our sessions, is this idea that, like, okay, whew, I got through it. I can handle this. Well, what if something happens that I can't handle? Right? And I even brought it up to Dick and Bettinger. I said, what happens if the big storm comes, right? The one that really takes me out, like the panic attack I can't control, like the thought that I can't control, the craziness that's deeply hidden that I've just, pushed back into the back of my mind. Um, and something that sticks with me that I also repeat is that you are a part of nature, and nature will always change. No matter what you do, even if you try to stop it, it will always change. And that is really like, I think I repeated that to myself last night in bed. I was like, okay, whatever. Like, if tonight's not great, it's not going to stay around forever, because you are part of nature, and nature will change. And that's where I sort of find myself leaning into, like, the spiritual part of it. And I'm actually not a very spiritual person. I'm not a religious person. but through you, I've started to realize like, okay, no, there is. You're right. Like I made two whole babies, and I didn't do anything, right? Like, I just, it's just nature. It's this innate being inside of me just made it, and you're like, this is kind of what I need to lean into, right? I need to stop thinking about it so practically and so intellectually, and believing that I can't change things, and just realize that there's so much out of my control. And I firmly believe that's a positive for me. And even if it means something big is on the horizon, something really terrible, one, through your teachings, I've learned it's not going to stick around. And two, the biggest one is that I can get through it. And yeah.
I
And I
absolutely.
think, oh, sorry, go ahead. Well, I think, and if anybody's listening, I think one thing that you asked Jesse, that I sort of prepared myself for is like, what would you tell yourself, or what would you want anybody else to hear? And I shy away from the well-meaning. You're not alone. Other people go through this because of exactly what I said before. It feels like nobody actually gets it, and there is nothing lonelier than an internal battle with your own mind. And it's so scary. And no matter how many times people said, "Oh, I have anxiety too," it never stuck around. So I'm not going to say that because I think we already know that statistic that everybody, struggles. But if you're really in it, like if you're really scared and going through something hard, my biggest thing is like be kind to yourself. Judgment is not only hard on you, it only makes it, this whole process harder. It actually is having an adverse effect. It tells you that there are thoughts that you should and shouldn't have, but really, what you learn is that these thoughts are all neutral until you give it power or an emotional response. Um, and yeah, you have scary thoughts, but you also have really beautiful thoughts, right? And you've been able to work through, everything that you've been dealing with up until now, and how that's so beautiful, right? And you did that. Like you're so be kind to yourself, because that judgment only makes it harder. Um, and then I think that what I said earlier, that you are part of nature and that things are going to change. You are never stuck. I think that's the biggest thing that scared me, was that I was stuck. You are never stuck. Even if you think you are, you can't be stuck. Like it's just the reality of it. I mean, I take a lot of like comfort in knowing that no, even if I try to, push it or do everything in my power to work against it, things are gonna change. Um, and then if you can, trust yourself. You have the wisdom to get you through this. You are all that you need. Um, and not to be so afraid of yourself, because you're not, what I said earlier, you're not a scary place. I mean, I think those are the three things that I wish people had said to me. And ultimately you did say to me, Lily, or through, through your teachings or through the books I read. Um, but yeah, I think just approach it with kindness and patience.
I absolutely love that. And as you were sharing, I had a moment of, oh my God, what if this recording, I lost it? And I was like, I think anxiety is a temptation.
Well,
um,
I took notes.
I know,
I
that's
prepped.
perfect. And then I'm like, what I mean, there's so much, and um, I'm just so grateful for you. And I think to me, what is so special about this conversation is it just wakes people up to their true nature, to this true spark. And it made me, maybe I'll read this and then we can end. It's this tiny little quote from Elsie Spittle, because I feel like this is what you were describing. So this is in her book, Our True Identity, which is what I felt like you reconnected to, your true self, your inner self. So she says, allow me to introduce you to your true self, the inner you, the divine spark within all humanity that is perfect. Not everyone knows about their true self. If you have met before, that is wonderful. If you have not had the pleasure, let me say that you are in for a treat. Another way of talking about true self is saying that everyone is blessed with innate mental health. Do we utilize our mental health to the fullest? I think not. The spiritual process of discovering that we do have this inherent gift within us is an ongoing development. What is so remarkable about discovering our true nature is that we don't have to try to improve ourselves or try to do better. Once we realize we have this divine spark within us, we automatically begin to change for the better. Effortless change is part of the package, the gift we are born with. If change is hard, it is because our ego belief system will not take a back seat. Our birthright is to enjoy life the best we can in all its manifestations. And to me, your story was just really embodying that your true nature was showing through throughout your whole journey, and then this kind of culmination in having it happen in the middle of the night when you were at this age, at this time, at this part of
Mhm.
your journey, that you were ready really to. And that's what's so empowering, because we're not sharing any techniques. It's like, oh, this is me, and I lost touch with me. I started identifying with my thoughts a lot, and my oh, and now it just awakens it, and it's like it's here in all of its manifestations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, really was. It was like, "Okay, it's just you and me, like, we gotta do this." And I mean, I really think I said that, but I really appreciate that quote. It does. More eloquently states exactly how I feel.
you were extremely eloquent. It was beautiful, and it was just I was like, that's that quote embodied in a beautiful, real story. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Sarah. This
Yeah,
was
thank you, and thank you to anybody who listened. There's always hope, and I'm rooting for you. And really thank you, Lily. Your program, I would say, and I don't take this lightly, it's changed my life, so thank you.
well, I mean, it's all you. It just awakened your true
Yeah,
nature. That's what
yeah,
it is. Just have a conversation. And so I didn't do anything besides show up in the same way that you're showing up right now. And it awakened it in you. And that's why it's so powerful. That's why I feel like I can never take credit. I'm like, I get to work with human beings, and now all humans have a divine spark.
yeah,
And so it feels like cheating because I get to work with humans and humans like you that also are drawn to me, that we'd be a good fit.
yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
so
Well,
much.
thank you, thank you.
Okay, yay. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully.
Okay, take
Okay,
care.
bye.
Bye.